Hi, welcome to my channel and thank you to my subscribers. If you have not already subscribed to this channel, please subscribe. In this video, we are going to see how to add Keycloak as a SAML identity provider in AWS Cognito. In the previous videos, we have seen similar configurations where we added Azure AD, Okta or Auth0 as SAML identity providers. So we are going to do something similar here. The only difference is we are going to use Keycloak as the identity provider, which is a bit open source identity provider. So before going to the configuration steps, I will explain the user journey on how this end-to-end flow will work. So when a user tries to access the client application in the browser, the client app will redirect to Cognito using authorization code grant flow, OpenID Connect, and Cognito will display the login page with a button. And when the user clicks the button, it will initiate a SAML authentication with Keycloak. And Keycloak will then display the login page to the user. And once the user enters a valid credential, Keycloak will post a SAML assertion back to Cognito. And if everything looks good, then Cognito will create or update the user profile in its local user pool and then post an authorization code back to the client app in the redirect URL. And client app will then use the authorization code to get access token, ID token, and refresh token. And based on the claims in the ID token and access token, the client app can either allow or deny access to that client application. So this is the end-to-end flow on how the SAML federation works between Cognito and Keycloak. In my demo, I'm going to use implicit flow between the client app and the Cognito because it is easier for the purpose of demo, but please don't use it for any of your applications which you are building for production because it is not a secure flow. But the good thing is like it is easier to view the details in a demo using implicit flow, and that is the only reason I'm using implicit. And you can always watch my other videos where I have shown how to integrate a client application with Cognito using authorization code grant flow. So now let's get to the configuration steps. And the very first step is to create a user pool in Cognito. So go to your AWS Management Console and then navigate to Cognito. And let's create a basic user pool. When I say basic user pool, a user pool with almost the default configuration for the purpose of demo. So let's go through these steps. Select username, go to next, leave this as it is, and we don't need MFA for now. Let's disable this. Go to the next step. Let's disable self-registration. We don't need these options. We don't have to specify any attributes for now. Go to the next step. Select email with Cognito. Anyway, we are not going to use this option. This is just to go past the screen. And now give a name for your user pool. I'm going to name it as Cognito Keycloak. And we need hosted UI for this purpose because we are adding a third-party identity provider in Cognito and only hosted UI supports that. And let's give a domain name. I'm going to name it as cogkc if it is available. If it is not available, you can use any random name like 1, 2, whatever you want. So in my case, it is available. I'm just using it. And let's create a client, Cognito Keycloak client. And we don't need a secret because I'm planning to use implicit flow for the purpose of demo, and only for the purpose of demo. I'm repeating it again because it is not a very secure integration. So always use authorization code grant flow. So if you're using authorization code grant flow, you need a client secret. So, like it's not mandatory, but it's always safe to have a client secret, so you can enable this option. But in this case, for the demo purpose, we don't need it, so I just left it as it is. And let's just quickly verify this. Everything looks good, and let's remove this authorization code grant and add implicit grant. And if you look at this warning, it will Cognito will say this is not recommended. As I said, it's not very secure. So let's remove the phone and then add OpenID, profile, and email. and leave these things. Go to the next screen, review if you want to go ahead and review all the settings, and then create the user pool. So this is the one we created, and you can view all the configurations by navigating to these tabs. But the main tab here is the app integration tab, where you can see the Cognito domain that was configured and the Cognito client that we created here. So this Cognito user pool configuration is done, but we still have to do the SAML Identity Provider configuration in this Cognito user pool. But before that, we need a Keycloak instance that is running in our local in order to do that configuration. So go to Google and search for Keycloak getting started, and you will get a link, getting started link, which explains the steps to download the Keycloak installable to your local, and then start the server, configure it, and use it for your demo purpose. I'm not going to go through all these steps. I will quickly just explain some of the key points. So you need a JDK in your local, open JDK 11 or similar version, and then you need to download the zip file to your local and unzip it, and then open a terminal window, whether it's your Windows or Mac or Linux, whatever machine you have. Open the command prompt and cd to that directory. So I have already downloaded, unzipped, and I have already cd to that directory. So once you do that, you need to start the server. So in my case, it is a Mac. So I'm going to use this command to start the server. So this is the very first time I'm configuring this Keycloak instance. So it will take some time to start, or like once it starts for the first time, the subsequent attempts should be slightly faster. But let's see. So I got a exception here. I got it before as well. It's basically a warning. So you don't have to worry about it. But in case you are deploying Keycloak in production, then you need to surely fix this. But for in the case of this demo, this is just a warning that I'm getting. It should not affect anything. But the key point here is the server already started in the development mode. And as mentioned here, right, open the console, and you need to create an admin credential when you log in for the very first time. So I'm creating the admin credentials, and then now you can log into the admin console. So I have logged into the admin console, and you can go through these settings when you have time. But for now, what we should do is go to this master drop down, and let's create a realm and name it as Cognito for now. And let's actually create a user for now, just for the testing purpose. Like we will be using it at a later point of time. So I will just name it as Cognito test user and example.com. Let's just make the email as verified. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's just a dummy user for now. And let's create the user. So once you create the user, you need to configure a password. So go to the credentials tab and set whatever password you want, like whatever you can easily remember. And let's disable this temporary. So it will be like a permanent password, and save the password. So the password got saved. Now the next step is to add Cognito as a SAML client in Keycloak. So now let's see how to do that. If you go to the Keycloak server administration document, you will see the steps for configuring OpenID Connect and SAML clients. So open this 12th section and select this creating a SAML client. I am not going to go through all these steps, but I will explain the key steps while I am showing the configuration in the in the Keycloak administration screen. So let's go back to the administration UI, select client, create a client, a SAML client, and we need to set a client ID. So if you look at the documentation, the client ID should match with the issuer value sent in the SAML authentication request posted from Cognito. So let's see how to get those details. Go to Cognito user pool documentation and go to this section where it explains how to add a third-party SAML identity provider. And here you can scroll down and see all the details. So this is the issuer ID that will be posted in the SAML authentication request. You can go through all these steps at a later point of time, but this is the identifier, issuer identifier that is posted in the SAML authentication request. So copy this and paste it here, and we need to replace this user pool ID with the user pool ID of my user pool. So in your case, it will be a different user pool ID because it's a unique identifier. So just replace that value, name this as Cognito SAML client, go to next, and here we need to configure the assertion consumer service URL, which is basically the redirect URL. So again, go back to Cognito documentation, and here you can see the assertion consumer endpoint for a Cognito SAML client. Copy this and go back to the screen, add it here, and we need to replace this your user pool domain with the domain that I configured in my user pool. Again, for your user pool, it will be a different value, so just make sure you copy the right value. So I have configured the assertion consumer service URL. Now save it, and the SAML client got created successfully. We need to do one more thing here. If you go to the keys tab, so by default, a SAML client expects a signed authentication request, which is not really required for 90% of the integrations. It's in very rare case that a client, SAML client, will ask for a signed SAML authent request. So let's disable that and click yes. So we don't need this option. Now the next step that we need to do is configure the list of SAML attributes that needs to be posted from Keycloak back to Cognito. So go to this client scopes section and create a new client scope and name it as Cognito SAML attributes, and select SAML option here and click save. When you click save, it will show this mappers tab. So let's actually add a predefined mapper. And in the predefined mapper, you can select email, given name, surname, and add it. So now we have added 3 attributes here, and let's review one by one attribute. So this is the email attribute, and the SAML attribute name is, it's kind of some kind of a identifier. So let's have a normal attribute name. Let's replace it as email. And then let's go to the next attribute, which is given name. So let's again replace the SAML attribute name as given name, because that will be easier for us to do the mapping in Cognito. And let's name this surname as surname. So we will have an email, given name, and surname attribute posted in the SAML assertion back to Cognito. The next step is to configure Keycloak as the identity provider in Cognito. So in order to do that, we need the metadata file. So go to realm settings. And if you scroll down, you will see the SAML identity provider metadata. Right click and save it as a XML file. I will name it as Keycloak SAML idp.xml and save it. Now let's go back to the Cognito screen, sign in experience tab, and add a SAML identity provider for Keycloak. So name it as Keycloak IDP, upload a metadata document, and this is the document that I downloaded. Add it and add the attribute mappings here. So given name is mapped to given name, SAML attribute from Keycloak, and family name is mapped to surname. So if you look at here, if you remember, we actually configured the client scopes, and this is the one. So we have configured three attributes: email, given name, surname. So that's what I'm actually doing it here. And this is email. So now the identity provider is added, and now we need to enable this identity provider for the client that we created during the initial Cognito user pool creation. So if you look at this client configuration, you can go here, edit. Currently it supports only Cognito user pool users, which is basically the native users that are created in Cognito user pool. Now I'm going to enable Keycloak IDP so that even users from Keycloak can access this client. So save changes. And just make sure we have OpenID profile email. Yeah, like anyway, this is only for the client that is integrated with Cognito. So now we added the Cognito Keycloak as one of the identity providers in this client. But before doing that, I actually forgot one of these steps. So after this client scope is created, we need to configure this client scope in the Cognito SAML client that we created. So go to the Cognito SAML client configuration, client scopes tab, and add the client scope that we created and add it as default. And let's remove default option for role list. We don't need it by default. So the Cognito SAML attributes will be posted by default. So I actually missed this step. So make sure you do this. So now the configuration is done on both the sides, on in the Cognito as well as in the Keycloak. So let's test it out in a Mozilla browser. Because I'm using Chrome for all these configurations, I don't want to use the same browser. So copy this view hosted UI link address, go to Mozilla, make sure all the cookies are cleared. Otherwise, you can use this plugin. Like I installed this manage all cookies plugin to clear the cookies whenever I do the testing. And similarly, I use this SAML tracer plugin whenever I want to test SAML flows. So open this SAML tracer plugin, keep it open in parallel. Now access this URL that I copied from Cognito user pool. So as I mentioned initially, it will display the username password field as well as a button. The username password field is for the native users who are created in the Cognito user pool, and this is for initiating the SAML authentication with Keycloak. So click this button, and if you see here, it posted a SAML authentication request to Keycloak. And Keycloak displayed this login page. So let's go back to Keycloak and see the user. And this is the user that I created. So copy this username, type it here, and then the password that you configured for that user. So if you look at this authentication, yeah, it is successful. Before that, before going to that screen, let's see the SAML assertion here. So you can see the SAML assertion here, the SAML XML, and you can also view all the attributes that are posted, the surname, the given name, and the email address. And similarly, you can see all those attributes in this ID token that was created by Cognito for this client. So you can see the family name, which is test user. You can see the email, which is cognito test user at example.com. And then the given name, which is Cognito. And actually, I think I made a typo. It's actually Cognito. And this should exactly match with the SAML attribute here. So you can go to the SAML tracer, Control F, and search. So this exact typo is present here as well. So this is the given name that you are seeing here in the ID token that was generated by Cognito. So let's go to the Cognito console and go to the users tab And here you will see this user which got created. When I log in for the very first time, it will actually create a temporary profile for that SAML user from Keycloak. So if you look at the diagram that I showed you in the step number 8, it will actually create a profile when I log in for the very first time. And when I log in for the next time, if there are any changes in my given name, last name, then it will update those changes. So you can see all the details here as well, the given name, family name, and email. And other than that, yeah, you can again create another user and do this end-to-end testing. And these are the end-to-end steps for configuring Keycloak as an identity provider in AWS Cognito. And I'm sure you will face lots of issues because there are lots of steps. And Keycloak is slightly different when compared to other identity products. You need to make some multiple config changes here and there to make it work as a SAML identity provider. So if you miss any of these steps, then you won't see some of the attributes or something else, or you might face some other issue. But don't worry, you can always post your questions, or you can always refer the video again to watch the missed steps. And in spite of that, if you still face issues, go ahead and post your questions in the comments, and I will make sure I reply back to your comment. I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks for watching, and please subscribe to support these type of videos. Thank you.